Hello, online students. I'm going to be recording the school-age child, and then I will be recording the adolescents. As far as the hospitalized child information, I will not be giving you a PowerPoint, and I will not be recording. What I have done instead is I am posting you some questions. And if you can go through and answer all those questions that's over that material and that content, and some of it's review, if you can go over and cover that and know those answers, then you should do extremely well on that part. So it's just a little bit different way of doing it besides just lecture, 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 lecture. Okay. All right, I'm going to get started then. I'm going to get off here. I do want to say, though, as I'm getting off here, that anything that we've already had is game to be on there. So we just build and build and build. You can't just forget that. I don't mean go back and study all the things that was on the last test, but that means that you could see some of that content again every once in a while. All right, so if I'm my PowerPoint, School Age Child, Chapter 15. So if you don't have your book, get it out and turn to Chapter 15. Also, you'll have a PowerPoint posted with and without note pages. One has 6 per slide and one only has 1 per slide. And you will be able to download that and go along with me as well. All right, so let's start. School age period. This is 6 to 12 years old, also known as our middle years. Now, we used to call it the gang age, but we have to be very careful about using that terminology in today's climate. From a Freudian view, this is the period of latency. If you haven't started memorizing these theorists with these age groups, you need to start doing that. If you'll remember, Freud said this was the same-sex peer time where best friends became important and establishing best friends. So it's a period of latency between the time of tranquility between what he called the Oedipus and Electra complexes to the eroticism of adolescence. So he thought it was a tranquil period in between this time. Biological development between the ages of 6 and 12, children will go an average of 2 months, or 2 months. Let's start all over. I rewound. Between the ages of 6 and 12, children will grow an average of 2 inches per year in height and will almost double their weight from 6 to 12 years of age. Increasing, your book says 4.5 to 6.5 pounds per year, but as long as you remember 4 to 6 pounds per year, you're fine. So that the average 6 years old would be 45.7 inches or 116 centimeters and would weigh 46 pounds or 21 kilograms. Now, when you're going from pounds to kilograms, you should all know that by now. 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds in conversion. And when you get your answer for kilograms, it should always be roughly half your poundage. If not, you did something wrong. That's a hint, hint, hint. So your 12-year-old should be 59 inches or 150 centimeters. And average weight is 88 pounds or 40 kilograms. During the early school age period, boys are about 1 inch taller and 2 pounds heavier than girls, so not too much. But then around 10 to 12, girls begin to catch up in their size and experience their pre-adolescent growth spurt. By age 12, then, girls are actually 1 inch taller and about 2 pounds heavier than boys. So after that, girls, though, everything goes downhill, and usually the boys gain in height. We just usually get the poor weight. What about proportional changes? Well, school-age kids are more graceful by this time than our preschoolers. There should be slimmer looking, longer legs with varying body proportions during this time. Their posture is improving. So children that did not lose that lordosis knock-kneed appearance of toddler and preschool will lose it now as their posture becomes more erect. Studies do show that the majority of U.S. children have a greater percentage of body fat than they did 20 years ago. Many are out of shape and can't even meet minimal standards of physical fitness exams these days. The percentage of body weight represented by muscle tissue is also increasing, so they're playing lots of sports. Facial changes. This is a hint. Face grows faster relative to the rest of the cranium. Proportions change, and sometimes it's known as the ugly duckling stage. Brain growth is very little by this time, so most of the time they should have already have had that. By ages 6, your 6-year molar is going to be coming in. Sometimes it's known as, again, the age of loose teeth. Of the 32 permanent teeth, 26 to 28 will erupt by the age of 12. And then the remaining molars follow during the teen years. The importance of this is caring for a child in the school age period who's having surgery. If you think about it, they have a lot of loose teeth, so that you need to assess for that before they go under. They need to care for their teeth. They need to floss regularly and see a dentist every 6 months. Now, the tooth fairy become a significant person, and if each parent chooses to go the tooth fairy route, I know she pays more than when I was little. Maturation of the systems. The heart. Heart size is smaller in relation to the rest of the body than in any other period of time in life. The heart rate and respiratory rate we know is decreasing. Remember that thing that we learned? Birth to 1, 1 to 4, 4 to 12, 12 and over, 140, 120, 180, 40, 30, 20, and 15. Remember that from here on out. I also told you about blood pressure and how to figure the upper and lower ends of systolic pressure. They have to be at least a year old, 90 plus, 2 times their year in age, 70 plus, 2 times their year in age. And we'll give you the upper and lower ends of blood pressure norms. For their eyes, by this time, if they have normal eyesight, should be 20/20. Bones are not complete. Mineralization is not complete of the bones until maturity. Now, backpacks are a big thing. We want to encourage them to carry them on both sides because of this statement right here. Even though most will still not shift the books, they will do it from, they will usually tend to just put it on one shoulder. Maturation, as far as other sex differences, you see wide differences between children at the age of middle school. Average age of puberty in girls is 12 and boys is 14. Prepubescence period is 2 years between the period that precedes puberty. So that would be 10 in girls and 12 in boys. Now, both early and late maturers struggle with feelings of self-consciousness and inferiority. And if you were to ask who suffers more, the early bloomers or the late bloomers, they would both say me, because they are the ones who are having to deal with it. Menarche, we know, is the onset of menstruation, and that begins to occur about 2.5 years after the first physical changes of puberty. And the big thing about menarche is we need to make sure that we're teaching these children that it may be normal for them to be very irregular in their pattern for the first year. That scares a lot of teens who start having, and preteens who start having a lot of irregular periods for their first year when that's quite normal. All right, on, let's see, 465 and 466. If you are a chart lover, that breaks it down by age group, by physical and motor, mental, adaptive, and personal social. So for the chart lovers, there you go. Physical activity. We know that exercise is essential for developmental progress during this period because muscle development is important, refinement of balance and coordination is important, gaining strength, and stimulating body functions through metabolic processes. As far as exercise and physical activity, appropriate activities at this time include running, jumping, skipping rope, swimming, bicycling, skating. All of those would be appropriate activities that promote coordination and development. Running, jumping, skipping rope, swimming, bicycling, and skating. Children should be provided opportunities of various kinds that provide satisfying experience to meet the individual's likes and dislikes, not necessarily the parents. Every child suited for some type of sport. The trick is to find the one that's appropriate for that child. Children have the same basic structure as boys and thus have a very similar response to exercise training during this time. So before puberty, there's really no essential differences in the strength and size between boys and girls. Now, what do you think about this? Activity should stress the mastery of the sport and enhancement of self-image rather than winning and pleasing others. All children should be given a chance to participate in ceremonies, and all of them should be recognized as members and not just individuals. That's what your book says. So what do you think about that? I see pros and cons of both sides. And if you're a parent who has someone who's an A-ball player looking for a scholarship, you have a different viewpoint of that if you have a child sitting on the bench not getting to play at all. So it really depends upon the circumstance. Fine and gross motor skills. You can see here I've got a drum set and they're playing a horn and they're writing. So they're increasing those fine and gross motor skills because they have more hand-eye coordination. Also things with dexterity, model building, music instruments, drawing, all of those things they do well at this age. Hint, hint, I would remember that. Psychosocial development for Freud. Again, they're in the latency period. He thought nothing was going on. We've got our best friends and we're developing foundations for relationships and getting ready for adolescence. Erikson believed that they were in the industry versus inferiority stage of accomplishment where they're wanting to be very industrious, and that goes back to those fine and gross motor skills and things that increase dexterity. The goal of this stage, he says, is to achieve a sense of personal and interpersonal competency through acquisition of technological and social skills. Now, technologically, most of our young kids are technologically skilled at these ages. All right, cognitive development, 6 to 7 years old. Remember, they're finishing up the pre-operational and getting ready from the 7 to 12-year-old to go into concrete operations. Remember, Piaget had an operation. Kohlberg went to the convention. Some capacity for abstract thought, but they still need some concrete props. They develop an understanding and use for relationship between things and ideals. So they go from perceptual to conceptual thought. Computers, phones, iPads, Kindles, all those become very important. Cognitive growth during this time can be stimulated by reading, crafts, word puzzles, schoolwork. So I've said earlier that their thinking goes from perceptual to conceptual. So he or she progresses from making judgments based upon what they see, perceptual, to what they actually reason, conceptual. So now they're able to reason more as they're getting ready to go into the next stage, formal operations. Increasingly, they're able to master symbols. They're able to use memory store. And they develop what we call the 8 components of concrete operational thought. And the 8 components are conservation, classification, seriation, decentration, reversibility, transitivity, learning to use the alphabet, and ability to read, which is our most significant skill we learn. So let's start out with conservation. So if you'll go to page 461 with me. Looking at this table, you are going to have to know it. And you remember we said the preschool child could not conserve. The school-age child can conserve. So what do we mean by that? Well, let's go down through here. Conservation of liquids. The conserving child recognizes that each glass contains the same amount of liquid. That's conservation of liquid. This is usually obtained at the age of 5 to 7. So if you have 2 identical glasses filled with the same level of equal amounts of liquid, and you pour one of those into different size shape, it's an unequal, makes it unequal, the conserving child still knows that it's the same amount of water. If you were to ask a child before this age, they would say the taller glass has more water. Conservation of mass and weight. If the conservation of mass, the conserving child recognizes that each object contains the same amount of dough. This is usually obtained at age 5 to 7. That's two identical balls, Play-Dohs, have equal mass. One ball's left rolled up, the other one's flattened. They will usually say the one rolled up has more before this age. The numbers, conserving child recognizes that each row contains the same number of marbles even after you distort them and make one row look longer. That occurs between the ages of 5 and 7. Before that time, they would think that the bottom row of marbles had more in it because it's spread out more. Length, conserving child recognizes that the two pencils are still of equal length even though you've moved them, usually obtained at age 6 to 7. Conservation of area, that's when you take two identical sheets of paper covered by the same number of stamps, leaving the same space of uncovered space. Then you rearrange them on a sheet of paper. That is usually obtained not until ages 9 or 10. The last one, which is the hardest to develop, is conservation of volume. Water displacement. The conserving child recognizes that water levels are the same since only the shape of the clay has changed. Pieces of clay displace the same volume of liquid, and that's usually not to the ages of 9 to 12. So you are going to have to know pages 461 in depth. Now, what about classification? What does that mean? That's grouping objects on the basis of a common trait. Grouping objects on the basis of a common trait. Collections, relationships. And you can think back into your childhood, things that you collected, things your children collected. Stickers, stamps, rocks, dolls, purses, trucks. There's several different things that could fall in there. Seriation is the ability to arrange things in a sensible order. The ability to arrange things in a sensible order. From big to bigger to biggest. From big to bigger to biggest. Decentration is the ability to stand back and see the whole picture rather than focusing only on one aspect. So now if you give them a piece of a puzzle, they're going to look at the whole picture before they start, not just on one aspect of the puzzle like they did earlier. Reversibility now is common instead of irreversibility. This is the understanding that some operations can be reversed mentally or in fact. 1 plus 3 is 4, so 3 plus 1 is 4. I can reverse my steps and get back home. Transitivity, this is the ability to decide a new relationship from a set of old ones. The ability to decide a new relationship from a set of old ones. John is taller than James. James is taller than Mike, so John is taller than Mike. And of course, learning the alphabet and learning to read is significant skills of the school-age child. So make sure you know those. Moral development, Kohlberg went to a convention. They're in the conventional stage, and if you just remember people pleasers during this stage, from here on out, you'll be fine. Intimate justice. It also is, according to Piaget, remember that's the misdeeds carry within them the seeds of their own punishment. You can't forget about any material. It comes back to haunt you. Now, this is usually your preschoolers and early school age. Okay. Self-esteem. At first, the child's self-concept is formed exclusively from what he believes his parents' evaluation of him is. But then they get into middle school, and the opinion of their peers and their teachers gives input. So that a child's self-concept now is composed of not only his own critical self-assessment, but what he interprets the opinions of members of his family, as well as other social contacts to be. School-age children depend almost entirely on external evidence of worth, and they do not have the capacity to develop their own criteria for evaluating their accomplishment. So nothing succeeds like success during this time. So what are some tips for promoting self-esteem in children? Pointing out positives, especially with opportunities for them assuming some responsibility. Offering encouragement and positive feedback while setting realistic goals. Setting them up for successes rather than failures. Lots of encouragement and support, and allowing them to know it's okay to make mistakes. Body image is an important part of self-concept. As a child expands their social environment, they continually compare their attributes and abilities with those of their peers. So some things hurt. I don't know if you remember, but I remember that old saying, fatty, fatty, 2x4, couldn't get through the bathroom door. So there's certain things you remember. So be careful with words. And children can be very cruel. We all know, been there and know that. Social relationships, parents, peer groups, and best friends during this time. And we hope that they are separate, that the parents aren't their peer groups and best friends. But sometimes that does happen. Clubs and peers, there may be a selection of persons who are privileged to join their certain little groups and clubs. Young age children, usually 6 to 9, have loosely organized rules, and they tend to change. One day you belong, the next day you don't. Older school age children, 9 to 12, have more conformity to their core of their club structure. The predominant feature of the club is usually rigid rules, secret codes, modes of dress. Unfortunately, there are some peer group activities that are unacceptable, unlawful, or even criminal in the United States. And we know there's been an increase in gang violence. The challenge for the healthcare professionals and teachers is how to deal with this. Bullying has become a very difficult thing to deal with. And it talks about bullying on page 462 and 463 in your book. So I want you to read on that. It says bullying is just the recurring activity that intends to cause harm, distress, or control toward another. Withdrawal, anxiety, depression, and decreased self-esteem can result. So it has manifestations, and sometimes long-term manifestations. Relationships with parents during this time, this is still their primary influence in shaping their personality, their standards, and value systems. So that tells you a lot right there. They still need parental controls. They need to respect adults, know there's rules, and know that those rules are going to be followed. My parents would never let me do that. Well, sometimes that's a good statement. They feel glad that they can say that, and that gives them something that they can fall back on. They need to experience gradually an increase in autonomy, not all at once. Earlier, parents made all these important decisions for them, if you think about it, up through preschool. Now, parents need to learn to involve their children in some of the decision making that affects them and to negotiate while still remaining in control. That can not only be hard for the child, but the parent as well. So, some guidelines for parents of pre-adolescents: don't overreact. Calmly attempt to get to the root of a problem. Avoid being manipulated. Give children room to grow. Treat pre-adolescents differently than younger children, and sometimes it's hard to do that. And don't forget to get help when needed. Schools are the second most important socializing agent. The teacher serves as a role model, we hope, that the children can identify and whom they can look up to. On page 467, there's a box called Helping Children in School. You need to read over that. It's got some general guidelines, and then it's got some more specific guidelines. Ethical misconduct: lying, cheating, and stealing. Lying. This is preschool children have difficulty distinguishing between fact and fiction. You don't believe them, just talk to one long enough. Younger children will lie to escape punishment. Remember that? They want to avoid punishment according to moral development. Older children may lie in order to meet expectations, that good boy, good girl syndrome. Cheating. Cheating's the most common in young children, aged 5 to 6. You don't believe me? Play a good game of Candyland with one of them. They find it difficult to lose at a game or a contest, and if they're not winning, they run to the corner and start crying or quit. They don't quite understand the wrongness of this act yet, and this should disappear as they grow older. I said should. Stealing: between the ages of 5 and 8, a child's sense of property rights are limited, very limited. They are attracted to things. They are equally likely to give away something valuable that does not belong to them, so be careful. Blood does or doesn't belong to them. They may trade off some big fancy toy you bought them for a rock. When young children are caught in punishment, they'll usually say, I didn't mean to do that, I won't do it again, and then repeat the performance again. Reasons why children steal, sometimes because simply they're attracted to it. Loss of sense of property rights and peer pressure is a big one. In most situations, it's best not to attempt to find some hidden meaning to their stealing. Usually just getting onto them along with punishment is enough. Play during this time, conformity and ritual are our two main ingredients of play school. If you'll remember, associative play was our most common in preschool, and it continues to be, along with cooperative play during school age. Chants and taunts become very, in secret languages like Pig Latin, becomes very characteristic. We are now in the age of computers as well with these children, and they consider that play. Some of the taunts and taunts I remember during school was Mary's mad and I'm glad and I know what will please her. Last one ends a rotten egg. Step on the crack, break your mother's back. Get your elbows off the table, Mabel, or you'll be married before you're able. Tick-tock, the game is locked, no one else can play. If you do, I'll take my shoe and knock you black and blue. I didn't like that one. It's raining, it's pouring. The old man is snoring. Just a few childhood memories there. Team play. You want to learn about the nature of competition, the importance of winning, but that's something that also you want to learn about team sport, the social part of it, the skill part of it. And that's something very important in the United States is about winning. They need to learn about the nature of competition, the importance of winning, but also how to deal with losing, sportsmanship. The middle years are a time of collections, and we talked about that earlier, and some of the collections they can have. Children become fascinated with complex board games. They love stories, enjoy reading. And again, nowadays it's reading on Kindles and Fires. And play helps to build ego mastery. So there is a reason they're doing that. Sleep and rest. The amount of sleep and rest required during middle childhood is individualized. The school-age child needs between 9.5 and 11 hours. Usually there's a little problem at bedtime for children 6 to 7. However, most children in middle school have to be reminded and reminded and reminded. FYI, children who sleep less are 3 times more likely to be overweight. It's ironic that part of the solution to obesity may lie in sleep, the most sedentary of all human activities. This is not on the test, this is just FYI. Why, you might ask? The lack of sleep lowers the level of leptin, L-E-P-T-I-N. This is a hormone that stimulates metabolism and decreases hunger. In addition, short nights of sleep boost the concentration of another hormone that increases hunger. So they do need their sleep. The influence of television. Well, of course, the greatest criticism of television has been violence. And part of that, parental guidelines need to be in place for TV viewing. You need to know what your children are not watching. You need to be limiting that, constructing chart tables. And some children don't watch TV as much anymore now that they've got their phones. Why is there an increase in violence? Some people say we've become immune and numb to the horror of violence because of the video games and things that they are seeing so much. Gradually accepting violence as a way to solve a solution. The violence they observe on TV. And identifying with certain characters of violence have all led to this. The nurse who observes the following signs of stress in a child should explore the situation further. And it talks about that on page 468. And it gives you there some of the signs and symptoms that you would look for and how to deal with that stress. So read over that section there. Accidents. The most common cause of severe accidental injury and death is motor vehicle accidents, car restraints. Most effective means of accident prevention is education. Activities during school-age children that can increase their chances of injury is bicycling, skateboarding, rollerblading, skiing, ATVs. On page 471, goes over what to do if they have an avulsed or a tooth that has come out or a permanent tooth. And it also shows you the tooth eruption on page 470. And it stresses on that page the importance of dental visits. So if you look here on page 471, it talks about first you want to recover the tooth, hold the tooth by the crown and avoid the root. If the tooth is dirty, rinse it gently under running water or saline, but be certain to insert a stopper in the sink or basin first. To reimplant the tooth, insert the tooth into the socket and be certain that the lip side is facing front. Have the child maintain the tooth in place by slightly biting down on a piece of gauze or a cloth. Transport the child to the dentist immediately. Avoid sudden stops or sharp turns to prevent dislodging it. If reluctant to replace the tooth, then place the avulsed tooth in a medium for transport, such as cold milk or saliva under the child or parent's tongue. If the child is holding the tooth in their mouth, avoid sudden stops to prevent them from swallowing it. But last but not least, it says, excuse me, my sneeze is coming through. You want to not forget to take the tooth with you. All right, it talks about on page 474, bicycle safety. And it talks about family-centered care, guidance during the school age for a 3-year-old to 7, 11 to 12, and health guidance. And then it talks about the right size bike on page 742. It says the right size bike is important. The child should be able to sit on the bike and place the balls of both feet on the ground. The foot should comfortably reach and manipulate the pedal in the down position. Wearing protective helmet should be mandatory. The helmet should be positioned so that it sits low on the forehead and parallel to the ground when the head is held upright. It should not roll back and forth or shift side to side. The strap should be fastened securely under the chin. So those are some anticipatory guidances that you can read through. One thing that we're seeing an increase in accidents is trampolines, particularly between 5 and 14. So we need education there as well. Sex education is usually brought up in middle school, 7th and 8th, well, about 6th grade is when we actually start. If you wait till 7th and 8th grade, it's really a little late. It appears to be the ideal time for formal sex education. So middle school is when most of the time they watch the film. Many authorities believe that the topic is best presented from a lifespan approach, and that's usually how the film addresses it that they show in a lot of the schools. When peers are the source of sex education, it's usually wrong. Answer children's questions with honesty and at their level of understanding. They often enjoy reading books, preparing them for puberty. One of them is, "Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret." What is the nurse's role, as particularly in the school? In this, some parents think they should be doing everything. Other parents believe they should not be teaching them anything about it. So it's kind of, you're okay if you do, and you're darned if you do, and darned if you don't. So they're very, very, very put in scrutiny for doing it. We have known of school nurses who have stepped into the role of seeing lots of pregnant girls in their schools. So they started handing out, condoms and doing sex education only to lose their jobs. So there's a fine line there. You want to present the material in an honest, straightforward manner. So review pages 470 through 71. So present it in a very honest manner, matter of fact. Use normal parts of growth and development, and always warn about STDs and pregnancies. All right, that's the end of this section. Be sure to go back and pull your immunization schedule and look at that again because it is pertinent to this age group as well. Thank you.